All right, so we have our second keynote for the afternoon. So Adam set the stage in what we were doing for today, and I hope it helped set the stage. Then we saw a whole bunch of presentations that went from APIs to mobile to really give you an idea of where we're going. I'll let Caroline introduce herself on continuing that thought. Round of applause.
So I am your after lunch speaker, and if you're up for it, I would ask you to consider indulging me. You might stand up, and you might put your hands in the air. You might like wiggle around a little bit, because doesn't that just feel a little better? And it also helps to calm my nerves because I get to see people being a little silly. Thank you so much for doing that with me. So, I'm Caroline Wong, and I'm the Chief Strategy Officer at Cobalt. I'm so delighted to be here with you today. I actually live really close to Vancouver, Washington. Not the same thing as Vancouver, BC, but when Jane and I were chatting just like 2 minutes ago, I was like, oh, you're from Vancouver? I'm right by Vancouver. And he was like, the other Vancouver. And I was like, okay. So now that we've gotten that cleared up, yeah, just really excited to be here with you in Portland. So wonderful to see so many faces. I can't say enough good things about OWASP and the community. I think it's so wonderful that we've got our colleagues from other chapters coming and supporting us. So thanks for being here, and thanks so much to everyone who made today happen. So I started my cybersecurity career more than 15 years ago because there were some questions about getting into the field. I'm actually gonna inject like a 30-second version of how I got into the field. So I was born in San Francisco. My parents are Chinese immigrants. When I was 16 or 17, my dad said to me, Caroline, what do you want to study in college? And I said, I would like to study dance because I love dance, or I would like to study psychology because I think that's very interesting. And he said, you're going to study engineering and you're going to do it at the best school you get accepted to. And that was just like how it was in my family. And so I went to UC Berkeley, I attended, go Bears, I studied electrical engineering and computer sciences, and then between my junior and senior year, I was looking for an internship. And I didn't want to live with my parents that summer. Their house was in San Francisco, and I did want to live with my then boyfriend and his family that summer, and they were in Silicon Valley. So I applied only to internships in Silicon Valley, and I end up getting this job at eBay, and it's in IT project management. So when I graduate, I say, hey, I've really enjoyed my internship. I'd love to work here full time. And they say, we're so sorry, there are no jobs available in IT because we have a hiring freeze right now. But, and this was the year 2005, so the first version of PCI DSS actually came out in December of 2004. So the timing was really, really fortunate. And they said, they're actually looking for some entry-level information security folks. And I was like, okay, I don't even know what that means, but I will go look it up on Wikipedia and find out. And the rest is sort of history. So I think that as far as getting into the field goes, everyone has a really unique story. There is no one way, there is no path. I think my best advice is to actually spend a lot of time on the job posting websites. So I thought that a lot of the resources mentioned in the panel previously about how to get started in application security or offensive security, really excellent recommendations. And in addition to that, I also recommend that you go on the job posting websites, whether it's LinkedIn or Indeed, or I'm not really even sure if monster.com is a thing, like wherever the job postings are at, and check those out, because more than asking anyone in the field, hey, what certification do you think I should get? Like, go to the actual job market and find out what skills folks are hiring for. And just kind of do your own analysis on the data. What are the jobs that are currently available? What are the levels for those jobs? What are the requirements in terms of any skills or training? And use that to guide your path. Because from my perspective, at any given point in time, it's actually going to be different. And so a little bit of not exactly what I planned to talk about, but I was so inspired by the chat that happened just now that I couldn't help but share a little bit there. So anyway, I started out on information security teams at eBay and Zynga. I actually ended up taking on management responsibilities at both of those companies. They were super cool places to be working in cybersecurity. In both places, we were running online operations 24/7 with millions of simultaneous users daily. eBay had an uptime requirement of 99.94%, and as one of the first major electronic commerce shops, enabled strangers to transact with each other over the internet. Zynga was growing incredibly rapidly as an early adopter of Amazon AWS. In 2009, there was this game called Farmville, and it launched, and in just a few weeks, the game went from 0 to 10 million daily active users. It was nuts. And a few months later, it rose to 80 million daily active users. I happen to be obsessed with security data and metrics. In 2011, I published a book with McGraw-Hill called Security Metrics, a Beginner's Guide. For the person who asked, for anyone in here, honestly, that's interested in getting into the field, if you want to find me on LinkedIn, then the first 5 people who find me on LinkedIn and write me a message saying, "Hey Caroline, would you send me one of your books?" I'd be delighted to mail you one of my books. And I do think that it's kind of a good primer. Last year in 2022, that book got inaugurated into the Cybersecurity Canada Hall of Fame, which is something that I'm super proud of. Now I work for a company called Cobalt. We are an offensive security company. The main thing we do is manual pen testing, and we build workflow collaboration software, and we do pen testing as a service. I've got a couple little books up here about pen testing as a service, which when we get to the Q&A part, if you have a question, and you're one of the first 3 people to ask a question, then I will be delighted to give you one of these books. And the digital copy of the book is available online at no cost. A Tale of Two Lists. Maybe the main thing I'm talking about in today's talk is actually the OWASP Top 10, and we'll get there in just a moment. So I want to start by telling you about the first time that I realized that most organizations do not do enough pen testing. Between 2013 and 2016, I led more than 36 BSIM assessments. If you're not familiar with BSIM, highly recommend checking it out, bsimm.com. BSIM stands for Building Security in Maturity Model, and it's a descriptive framework for real-life software security. So in this industry, we've got all sorts of frameworks and best practices and standards, and a lot of them take the format of, you should do this, you should do that. And it's important to know what we should do. It's also interesting to know what people actually do. Because sometimes you should do something, but you don't have money for it. Sometimes you should do something, but you don't have time for it. If you're actually doing something, then that means that hopefully it's something you should be doing, and you actually found time and resources and money to do it. So the BSIM is, in my opinion, a particularly cool framework because it actually is a descriptive model of real-life software security. There are, at any given time, more than 100 firms in the BSIM data pool. And this data pool can be thought of as somewhat representative of all the companies in the world that operate using software, but with one little tiny caveat. It costs 5 figures to do a BSIM, and if your organization can spend that much money paying a management consultant to interview your software development teams and give you a scorecard and a report on how well you're doing software security, you're probably relatively mature when it comes to your software security program. So I think it's fair to assume that the BSIM data pool is actually above average compared to the rest of the world. I learned something really startling when I was doing this work, flying around the world, talking to teams about their software development practices. I found out that a typical enterprise with 1,000 software applications was only doing manual pen testing on about 100 of those applications. Just 10% of most enterprise application portfolios were getting manual pen testing. I consider that to be highly terrifying. There are a lot of reasons for this. Historically, pen testing has been expensive and slow. It is really hard to get access to quality talent, whether you're trying to build an in-house team or work with a third-party provider. I do have some good news. So, Cobalt does manual pen testing. We do a lot of manual pen testing. To date, we've actually done more than 10,000 manual pen test engagements. And every year since 2019, we publish a research report that's based on the data from the pen tests which were conducted in the previous years. And we also do a survey. So in the 2021 State of Pen Testing report, we asked more than 600 international security folks how much pen testing is happening at your organizations. And we actually found out that at that time, folks are pen testing 63% of their application portfolios. So this is a huge increase from just 10% to 63%. And I have some theories as to why and how that change occurred. And I actually think we have an opportunity to increase that number even further. I actually think of software security for software as like taking care of our software. Like, we care about the software we build. It's meaningful to us, it's valuable to us, and it's our responsibility as technology people to take care of it. And so when I think about, at that point in time, only doing manual pen testing for 10% of an enterprise application security portfolio, I kind of think, this is like if I had 100 houseplants and I only watered 10 of them, because that's taking care of houseplants. It's kind of like, oh, next slide, here's the cats. Okay, if you're in charge of taking care of 100 cats, then 10%, it would be totally unacceptable to provide food and shelter for only 10 of them. So here are our lists. I actually also teach courses on LinkedIn Learning. There is a series on the OWASP Top 10, and if Adam teaches courses on LinkedIn Learning too, by the way.
I teach your course too.
and there's a really extra special fun cameo where Adam actually is highlighted in one of my courses. If your company pays for LinkedIn Learning, you have access to it at no cost. If your company does not pay for LinkedIn Learning, write me a message on LinkedIn and say, hey Caroline, I would love to get access to all your courses for free, and I will make that happen for you. So anyway, I teach about the OWASP Top 10, and in 2021, our industry got a new OWASP Top 10. The very first OWASP Top 10 came out in 2003, literally 20 years ago. And when I put our latest OWASP Top 10 next to the original Top 10, the two are alarmingly similar. What this says to me is that the most common vulnerabilities that are found in web applications today, they're the same as the ones that we were finding 20 years ago. Okay, 2003, 2021, that's a difference of 17 years. 17 years is a really long time. In 2003, Matthew McConaughey starred in a great film called How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days. For anyone familiar with that film, this is the love fern scene. 2021, fast forward 17 years later, Matthew McConaughey played a singing animated koala in the movie Sing 2. 17 years is a long time. So why is it that things haven't changed? Why aren't things getting way better, way faster? Because the thing is, we actually know what to do. The OWASP Top 10 and supporting guidance provides information on exactly how to find and fix and prevent these most common vulnerability types. The information has stayed consistent for 20 years. The problem is it's just not particularly fun or cheap or convenient to do. I mentioned that in our industry we have a lot of frameworks, best practices, and standards. This graphic on the left is the table of contents for NIST 853, a nearly 500-page long document. And I think that as an industry, sometimes we do ourselves a disservice with these extremely lengthy documents. I actually think that sometimes this makes cybersecurity seem a lot more complicated than it actually is. I believe that cybersecurity can be simple. Simple does not necessarily mean easy, but simple does mean that it can be easier to understand. We came up with this cute picture on the right. If you want, you can Google a practitioner's guide to application security, and you can download this like 20-page document about software security, application security at no cost. And it simply says, there's 4 things you need to do. You need to govern your software. You need to identify your assets. You need to risk rank those assets. You need to have some way that you're managing third-party vendor risk. And then you just need to go around and find defects, security problems, vulnerabilities, maybe flaws via threat modeling. And then you should fix those things that you find, and then you should try and prevent those things. I do think that we have an opportunity to think about things in a simpler way. We have an opportunity to really focus on the things that matter and to do them well and to do them often. So let me take a step back and ask the question, what is the point of cybersecurity? We're trying to manage risk. Security is about protecting value, and so much of what we value today has shifted from the physical realm to the digital realm. Value protection is about risk management. This list is reasons why we need to be able to manage risk because we care about what other people think. This second list is a list of reasons why we need to manage risk because we want to build and maintain and operate software that's actually resilient to malicious attack. We want to secure our software. Side note, I teach a course called Learning Security Metrics on LinkedIn Learning, and it goes through these 2 lists in pretty great detail. And again, if you want to access those courses at no cost, just send me a message on LinkedIn. I'd be happy to help you out with that. So I want to, at this point in time, quote my former manager, Sammy Miguez, and one of the creators of the BSIM. So this is what Sammy says. He says, historically, the industry has not gotten risk management right. Budget-driven risk management is not good enough. If we're only able to cover 10% of the software portfolio with appropriate security testing, that is not good enough. In the next section of this talk, I want to make a big comparison. I want to take a look at cybersecurity over the past 20 years, and then I want to look at software development over the past decade or so. And I just want to make some observations and share those with you. So let's start out with cybersecurity over the past 20 years. This article came out in 2018, and 20 years prior to 2018, a group of hackers went to Washington with a warning for Congress. They said, look, software and computer networks are really insecure. And during that now infamous hearing in May 1998, one of them said to senators that any of the 7 individuals seated before you could take down the internet in just half an hour. In 2018, 20 years later, the same group of hackers went back and offered a similarly bleak assessment. Digital security is hardly any better. So one of those individuals is called Joe Grand. He went by the hacker name Kingpin in his Loft days. And he says, at Loft, we tried to be the voice of reason in raising awareness for problems. Nearly all of what we said 20 years ago still holds true. Yes, there have been improvements, but the general class of problems are the same. Another one of them is Chris Wysopal. And Chris said, back then the threat was the teenage hacker. Now it's nation states. So every vulnerability got a lot more risky. 20 years ago, the threat of nation states and foreign governments with skilled hackers seemed so theoretical. But we all know that 20 years later, this is happening constantly. Before I talk a little bit about the past decade in software development, first I want to say, if you haven't watched this hearing, you should totally go on YouTube and watch it. It's so great. It's both so great and it's also kind of so alarming because it was 1998 and like so much of it is exactly what's happening today. Highly recommend. And I read this book and it's called 4,000 Weeks. And it's written by this productivity author. But it's not a productivity book in the sense that it tells you to brush your teeth while you're taking a shower in order to save 5 minutes in the morning. It's the kind of productivity book that's like, look, the average human lifespan is 4,000 weeks long. And personally, I'm right around that 2,000 weeks mark. I mean, what a way to think about life. And I happen to have worked my entire career in cybersecurity, and I kind of intend to spend my next 20 years working in this field, and I would really like to see some change. So anyway, let's take a look over at our friends in software development, because my observation is that while the state of cybersecurity has remained stagnant for about the past 20 years, software development has actually made tremendous strides in the last 10 years. So in 2011, Puppet released the first State of DevOps report. By 2013, just 2 years later, the State of DevOps report had established the relationship between DevOps and high performance. So organizations that do DevOps consistently report more frequent deployments, shorter time to change, lower failure rates, and faster time to recovery. These results have a direct impact on business outcomes. Organizations that can do things faster create comparative advantages because they can deliver solutions to their customers faster. Shorter mean time to recovery and lower change failure rates result in more stable systems. So, if companies that are practicing DevOps have higher performance outcomes, then naturally we as security people would like to learn about what those companies are doing. And the State of DevOps report actually provides some prescriptive advice about what sorts of things work best in today's environment. This is a quote from the report. Security can't be an afterthought or the final step before delivery. It must be integrated throughout the software development process. To securely deliver software, security practices must evolve faster than the techniques used by malicious actors. During the 2020 SolarWinds and CodeCov software supply chain attacks, hackers covertly embedded themselves into the infrastructure of thousands of customers of those companies. Given the widespread impact of these attacks, the industry must shift from a preventative to a diagnostic approach, where software teams should assume that their systems are already compromised and build security into their supply chain. It is, of course, easy to emphasize the importance of security and suggest that teams need to prioritize it, but doing so requires several changes from traditional information security methods. The report says you can improve security, improve software delivery and operational performance, and improve organizational performance by doing things like, thing one, conduct a security review for all major features. Thing 2, invite InfoSec early and often. Include InfoSec during planning and all subsequent phases of application development so that security-related weaknesses can be spotted early, which gives the team more time to fix them. And they also found that high-quality documentation drives the success of a variety of capabilities, security being no exception. They found that teams with high-quality documentation were 3.8 times as likely to integrate security throughout the development process. Not everyone in an organization needs to have expertise in cryptography. The expertise of those who do is best shared in an organization via documented security practices. So when I ask myself, okay, if in cybersecurity, we've kind of like stayed still for 20 years, but in software development, these folks were able to like move fast, make big changes. Like, what did they do that we could learn from? And when I think about the past 10 or so years in software development, I think about SaaS, and I think about cloud. So when I was on the eBay security team, we had data centers, and we had to go and buy servers, and we had to go and install those servers, and we had to power those servers. And it was really expensive, and it took a lot of money up front. And then when I was at Zynga, where Farmville exploded in terms of use, we were using Amazon AWS, one of the first users actually. And we had this like on-demand elasticity, super fast, use what you need, pay for what you need. So at Cobalt, we've taken that model and we've used it as inspiration. So traditionally, if your organization needs to do a manual pen test, you have one of two options. Option one, you try and build an internal pen test team. That can be hard to do because really good pen testers tend to be really expensive. And then the other option you have is to reach out to your local consulting firm and say, hey, can you do a pen test project for me? And they'll say, yeah, we'd be happy to. You know, but we've only got X number of consultants and they're booked on these other projects, so we're just gonna have to wait a little bit until they're available to do a project. And so we've tried to SaaSify manual pen testing. And we can actually, probably our top value proposition is that we can get a manual pen test going in less than 24 hours. Now I want to tell you about our most recent research report. So, we've done more than 10,000 manual pen test engagements to date. You can find this online at no cost. It's like 30 pages, maybe. And let me tell you a little bit about the data that went into this report. So we have, also side note, we've been producing this report ever since 2019. So this is the 5th annual. And if you're interested in this stuff, I recommend checking out the earlier versions as well. Yeah. So the data that went into this one comes from more than 3,000 pen tests, which were performed in the year 2022, covering web, API, mobile, network, cloud config, resulting in a data pool of more than 16,000 security vulnerability findings. And the companies that we did these at are various sizes, various industries, including SaaS, insurance, fintech, across geographies, EMEA, APAC, North America, South America. In addition to the data from the pen tests, we also surveyed more than 1,000 international cybersecurity professionals who worked at companies of 200 people or more, and none of the people surveyed are Cobalt customers. So we wanted to kind of get two different kinds of data sets. There's a ton of data in the report, and I want us to just look at like 1 or 2 pictures. So here's one picture. So one of the cool things about the data that we have is our pen test teams go and they find security vulnerabilities and they put them into the system, and then our customers go and fix those vulnerabilities, and then they mark them as fixed and they ask for a retest. So we actually have some pretty cool data on when stuff gets fixed. And here comes a little bit of interactive part of the session. I'm just gonna ask, when you look at this graph, Are there any conclusions that you feel like you can draw? Yes?
Big companies suck at fixing stuff fast.
Yeah, they do. And I think, my theory as to why is that there's simply more people that need to get involved, and it's harder to get stuff done sometimes when you have a bunch of people versus if you're like a 5-person company, you can just turn to your buddy and say like, hey, you want to fix that thing? Then it's just easier than trying to figure out like who owns this and which team and so yes, true. Any others? Yes.
No one cares about information.
That is true. And, we have to prioritize, right? We have limited time, limited resources, limited budget. Yeah. I have one more PTAS book to give away.
Big companies can afford the insurance that will protect them against the breaches that not fixing these things will lead to.
It's very interesting. It's very interesting to wonder what are the consequences for these different organizations, right? And I think, frankly, that the reason stuff hasn't gotten way, way better in the past 20 years is because writing stable, secure software and writing not stable, not secure software, like, what are the results? What are the consequences? Folks are not really feeling the pain, I think, of some of these decisions. Yes?
From experience in corporations, I see large corporations being slower because they outsource a lot of their IT. And it's not in their contract, so they can't fix it till it's added to the contract or they're given a change ticket.
That's a really
Smaller
good point.
companies sending employees fixing it.
That's a really good point. If the people making your code are not in-house, if you're working with an outsourced vendor, you're paying the outsourced vendor to build this thing, you're asking them to fix this thing, they're like, sure, just pay me more. And that takes time and money.
One trend that I've seen, especially with the enterprise cloud and things like that, is security is not my responsibility to pass client. It's somebody else's responsibility. I'll add to maintain that image. It's somebody else's responsibility to maintain that image. And we've seen like more and more teams that are turned to inaction because it's not my job, right? So I think that's one of the big trends.
Yeah? Whose job is it to fix these things? Not mine, not mine, not mine. It's like finding some mediation hot potato.
We aren't fixing this until customers complain about it.
Right. What's the
Like, we're not,
consequence?
like, we know it's a problem, we're not doing anything because it's not costing us any money in sales right now.
Right. We know, and it's not a priority.
Bigger companies have more money to spend on additional security tools, so they can put mitigations in place to say we don't have to fix that. Or they have large GRC teams that can risk reduce it down to say it's not actually critical, it's actually a low, and we'll disagree with the findings.
Yeah, a little risk management
Which may
magic.
likely be true.
Yeah, I mean, I know that there was a comment about defense in depth.
More bigger, more complex systems are harder to fix.
Totally. It is way harder to fix something that's really big and really complex. And if it's really old, it's that much harder.
Did you mention that big companies don't feel the consequences of writing insecure code?
I have a theory about that, yes.
Why? I'm curious.
I think that, and actually, my course on LinkedIn Learning about learning security metrics goes into this a little bit, which is to say, if an organization's CEO gets up at the beginning of, say, 2023 and says to the company, hey, let me tell you about our company priorities for this year. It's probably going to be something like, we're going to increase revenue, we're going to sell more stuff, and maybe we're going to build cool stuff to make that happen. It might not be things like, we're going to fix our security findings. It's a matter of business priorities, and in my opinion, there's actually not a reason that causes executive teams at organizations to prioritize fixing security vulnerabilities today. And I think that that will change. One of the things that I wonder about, like, how do you get people to really change their behavior and how they spend their time? And I think about going to an airport these days. And when I go to an airport, I have to take off my shoes. And I can't, carry a large water bottle. And I have to, go through a scanner. That wasn't the case 30 years ago. Something like big and bad happened, and then a group of people decided we're going to change our behavior. And I actually wonder a little bit, like, when our big and bad cybersecurity thing is going to happen that actually causes people to change their behavior.
I'm my thought is, or my first company was, most of our clients were financial, bank. None of them cared about security. They didn't understand it or want to understand it. Now, most of our clients are tech companies. They all seem to care. It's really interesting. My thought was, no matter what happens, they're not going to care. If they don't care, it needs to be like, I think the developers need to care about it in the first place for other reason for it. You can't convince them, how bad things go. So I think top down might help, but I don't know. I don't have hope. I have little hope for that for people who don't care already.
Yeah, there's a cultural aspect. I would love to continue this conversation, and we'll see how much time we have. And then let's see. Oh, 2:13, we've got about 15 minutes. We'll keep going. I'm enjoying this so much. I wish we could do this for way longer. There's this whole section in this report where we talk to more than 1,000 security professionals, primarily located in the US and in Germany and in the United Kingdom. And we got some really interesting data about how organizations are getting affected by layoffs and budget cuts. So one of the problems about organizations doing layoffs and cutting budgets is that security teams end up having less resources. And what happens is security vulnerabilities, more of them go unaddressed, level of risks increase, and it's just sort of like this downward spiral. We went to this kind of depressing place. I'm gonna change the energy a little bit and say, we believe that there are things that organizations can do to up-level their pen test programs. And if an organization wants to move from ad hoc to structured and get to strategic, then here are 3 tips for how. Also, this next section has cartoons. So, why does a company need a pen test? Usually it's because of one or more of a handful of reasons. Maybe there's a customer who says, I need to see a pen test report before I buy your product, which might actually have something to do with the culture of technology companies valuing security. Thing 2, there might be a regulator who says, I need to see your pen test report as part of a regulatory compliance exercise. Reason 3, maybe your organization is getting acquired or going through a merger, and the company that's either buying yours or combining with yours wants to see a pen test before they do the business transaction, which would result in you adding your risk profile to theirs. Or maybe, simply, you've just deployed a new feature or an entirely new product, and you just want to find and fix security vulnerabilities before they can be exploited by malicious actors. In any case, one way to improve your pen test program is just to start faster. When you've decided that you need to do a manual pen test, get those pen testers doing manual pen test activities right away, like within 24 hours, because the sooner you start, the sooner you can have a finalized pen test report in the hands of someone who is demanding it. It also means that you're that much closer to knowing about potentially exploitable vulnerabilities in your software, and the sooner you know about them, the sooner you can fix them. And then the sooner you can start your next pen test, because probably the product and engineering teams are just going to keep building new things. And if those new things aren't getting properly security tested, then it's possible that they're also vulnerable. Thing number 2, do remediation, fix your findings. One super silly thing that I've observed throughout my career working in cybersecurity is that there are a lot of compliance regimes and best practices frameworks that say you should do defect discovery. Like, you should do a pen test, you should run a scan. But then, they don't actually require that you fix what you find, which of course is what makes this stuff more secure. And so when I talk about scaling pen testing, I don't just mean print a PDF, hand it to a regulator, check a box, and move on with the rest of your day. I mean, when you find security vulnerabilities, fix them. Now, I recognize that fixing vulnerabilities is hard. And most of the time, if you're a security person, fixing vulnerabilities actually involves getting someone else to do something. Getting other people to do stuff is hard. And I want to tell you about one way that I found out does not work. If I get a 50-page PDF in my email, and then I forward it to a bunch of engineering managers, and I say, here are the results from our pen test that we did, please work with your teams to get the findings remediated, probably they open that email, and their body fills with cortisol, and then they just move on to whatever the next thing was that they were going to do. A better way is if, as soon as a finding is discovered, the engineering team finds out through Slack or through whatever chat software they use to talk to each other, and then goes into something like Jira, where a ticket has already been submitted that can get worked right away. And it would be so cool if the engineer who is fixing the problem could actually talk directly to the pen tester who found the issue in the first place, so that they could ask each other questions and give each other advice and work together to get these security vulnerabilities addressed. Let's talk a little bit about data. I've been obsessed with data and metrics since the start of my career. I think that better data allows us to make better decisions, and that can result in better outcomes. And so at this late stage in the cybersecurity game, let's remember that hackers testified before the US Senate in 1998. We should actually have a ton of pen test data, and in theory that could help us a lot. But it takes grunty, time-consuming effort to physically parse through piles of customized consulting reports to get actual pen test data and then format it in such a way that it can be collected and analyzed over time. I think there's a better way. If the pen test data is in a standardized format that can be organized and accessed through an API, then you can actually analyze your data. You can actually use it. For years, I've heard people say, yeah, the OWASP Top 10 is good and all, but what's really important is your organization's top 10, or top 5, or top 3. But I don't think that many organizations actually have their security metrics to a maturity level where they even know what their top 3 classes of security vulnerabilities are. All right, we've got just a few minutes, so I'm gonna move on to kind of the closing, and I'd love for us to chat a little bit more. So today is very special for me. I brought a guest with me. My daughter is hanging out here. Hi, Sue. Thanks for coming. So anyway, she's really shy, so she actually is very upset that I just pointed her out. In 2021, there was so much talk about ransomware. JBS, Colonial Pipeline. And I had opportunities to speak with reporters, and they would ask me about ransomware. And to me, it's just like so frustrating, because the first ransomware attack happened when I was 6 years old. This attack directed users to mail $189 to a PO address in Panama. It's been a while. We know how to fix this. Literally, if you just know what your assets are and then update them and then patch them, and then make backups, and then make sure those backups work, literally, you can go a long way to preventing ransomware. Last year, the average ransomware payment was $4.7 million. Like, what is even going on? Like, should we be considering job changes? Like, that's a big growth. So anyway, when the first ransomware attack happened in 1989, I was 6 years old. This is a photo of my daughter when she was 6. And when she's 40, I don't want us to be talking about the same types of security vulnerabilities that we're talking about today. If we don't start turning this around right now, it's just gonna get worse. I would really like for the world to be a safe place for my daughter and for my grandchildren. I would love it if they had reliable energy sources and food processing plants that are safe and operational. I really want their computers and the internet to be a place where they can connect and create. It is time for us to do better, and I believe we can. I'm actually really super hopeful, but no one's gonna do it for us. There is no software program or machine learning or even AI that can totally do this for us. We actually have to decide that we want it, and then we have to do it. It won't necessarily be easy, but it can be simple. We just need to work together, security people and engineers, to collaboratively decide that it's important enough to get asset inventory right. We have to decide it's important enough to update our software and install patches when our software is vulnerable. We have to decide to look for security vulnerabilities that we know can be exploited and find them and fix them. And this is something that I think we can only do together. It is time. Thank you so much. We've got a few minutes, and I would welcome any questions or comments. Yes?
What makes you why do you feel so hopeful? What makes you feel that way? Pessimistic and cynical?
So one of the things that I think about kind of a lot is what are the things that are within our control and what are the things that are not within our control. And one of the things that I personally try to do for my mental health is I try and focus on the things that I can control and kind of try and let go of the things while staying aware of them, the things I cannot control. And the thing about software is we made it. Software is not like a rock or a tree or like, you know, the sky. Like, humans made software. And so if humans decide that we're gonna make secure software, it's actually totally possible. And I think it's actually gonna get, I think it's only gonna get more and more valuable from here on out. And at some point in time, there will be consequences.
Yes.
And then stuff's gonna change. Like, my understanding is that when cars first came out, they didn't have seatbelts. How did cars get seatbelts? Probably like some unfortunate things happened.
When they first came out, you had to walk in front of the little lantern.
I did not know about this lantern. That's phenomenal.
So,
Phenomenal. I should look into this whole car history thing so that I can be my knowledge. Great question. Thank you.
Just have a question. When you talk about the pentest, so what do you recommend for more frequency? So could it be specific, like a recommended number, like how you run out when we work with Agile, that's it, like if you deliver like by week?
Yeah. So I have a perspective on that, and I think that first of all, what's kind of normal or thought of as normal is once a year. And I think that's inadequate because if I think about like software today and then a year passes, like there's lots of stuff that's changed. And so I think that when a new product comes out, a new feature, a new release, that's a great opportunity to do a pen test. And you don't necessarily have to pen test all the stuff all the time. You could just pen test like what changed. But I do think that actually the best way for any organization to figure out how frequently should they be doing pen testing is based on the frequency of their software releases.
How do you think about quality of manual pen testing services? Like, how do you look at, I mean, obviously, like,
we all have known individuals who are like, that's a really great individual engineer who knows what they're doing, and that's a mediocre one, right?
Yeah.
But like, at a kind of an enterprise level, how do you think about the quality of pen testing?
I have a metric to share with you, and full transparency, I made it up. But I made it up using data. First, I want to say, just to add more context to your question, say you've got a piece of software, that software has vulnerabilities. I think it's actually impossible to ever know that you found 100% of the vulnerabilities. The only thing that you can know is which ones you found. You can't know about the ones that are there that you didn't find, because then you would have found them. So there's this thing, right? And the thing about software is like, some software is way more insecure than other software, and some software is like actually pretty secure. But I think, based on data that I've looked at from having data, access to the data for more than 10,000 manual pen tests, I think that generally speaking, 10% or less should have 3 or less findings that are low or informational severity. So there will be pen tests with no findings. There will be pen tests with 1 low finding. There will be pen tests with 2 findings, one of which is low and one of which is informational. And findings, or tests of that type, in my opinion, should be 10% or less. So that's my thought. Thanks for the question.
I've got a question. So I'm on a local Mountain Community College, their board for their cyber program, and what I get from the students a lot is this sort of like the coolness of red teaming. Now, I'm a blue team perimeter security type of person, and you talked about the remediation part. Do you think that's a factor of like the coolness is in the offense of the pen test, but when, okay, here's the remediation that you should do, that's kind of more of a blue team person, there's not that much excitement on that side.
I do think that some of the super important work that needs to get done is not necessarily like very sexy or flashy. Like, how important are backups, and how important is it that we make sure that our backups work? And how not sexy is that work? I think there's ways to reframe the ways in which we think about these things. You know, if we only think that firefighters are cool, which they totally are, then like, why don't we also think that any and everyone who does any and every activity having to do with wildfire prevention is also cool? It's really 2 sides of the same coin, and I think we have an opportunity to think about it differently, to talk about it differently, and to actually change that, because making stuff secure is cool. Breaking stuff is cool too, but in my opinion, it's only cool to the point where then you're informed and able to fix it. Yes?
It's just logistics. I can barely hear you. Can you use the mic? Thanks.
I'm glad you said that. I'm really glad you said that, and my apologies. It is 2:30, and I would be delighted to take more questions. Please email me, please connect with me. Thank you so much for having me today. I wish I had called on you earlier.